The park was called Everlasting Fun. It wasn't the biggest, nor the most advertised. Situated between an off-ramp and the Ohio cornfields, it had been around since the 1970s, slowly falling apart, but clinging to life with the smell of hot butter, cotton candy, and old wood. We went there because my daughter, Ellie, was 10 years old and desperately wanted to ride Devil's Canyon, the old wooden roller coaster they'd talked so much about on the school bus. David, had taken the day off. My wife, Sarah, was more or less against it. She'd read something about inspections, but her daughter's look won her over. This is classic Sarah, real Americana, not like those plastic Disney things. The first thing I noticed was the silence. It was Saturday, but the parking lot was barely a third full. The music from the speakers was muffled and raspy. The staff consisted mostly of teenagers glued to their phones and a few grown men with empty, tired eyes as if they were serving time. The air smelled not only of cotton candy, but also of the acrid ozone from old generators and something musty, as if coming from underground. But Ellie didn't notice. She dragged us toward the canyon. The structure was truly impressive and ancient. The wood had darkened with age, with patches of fresh, yellowed wood visible here and there. The creaking was so loud you could hear it even from below. Over the music, I shuddered, but the line was short, and Ellie was jumping with impatience, so we gave in. While she and Sarah stood in line, I went to buy water. Near the kiosk, I saw a man in a greasy uniform with a badge that read, Chad, Chief Mechanic. He smoked, looking blankly toward the canyon. Impressive design, I said, trying to be friendly. He slowly looked at me and exhaled smoke. Design, he repeated without intonation. Yeah, old. Is it safe? I asked half-jokingly. Chad looked at his cigarette, then at me. His eyes were clouded. Papers are in order, inspection was done, the cars are new, installed last season, mounts. He said this as if he were reading off a boring list. Then he abruptly tossed his cigarette and headed toward the doorless maintenance building, from which emanated the smell of engine oil and mold. Sarah and I got into the car. Ellie was in front of us. The seatbelt was frayed. The plastic latch cracked. I tugged at it. It seemed to hold. The operator, a skinny teenager with acne, didn't even glance at us as he flicked the switch. A sharp jerk and we were moving upward, up the first climb. The creaking was deafening. It felt as if the entire structure was breathing and groaning beneath us. I grabbed Sarah's hand. It was cold. And then, the worst began. Not the descent itself that was swift and terrifying, as expected. The worst came afterward. When the cart, having completed its route, was supposed to stop at the finishing platform, but it didn't stop. It simply slowed slightly and continued on with a dull clang a second lap, without any orders. Dad? Ellie turned around, and for the first time, her voice sounded not joy, but bewilderment. Everything's fine, just a glitch, I said automatically. But the glitch didn't stop. We started moving up again, slower, as if the engine was choking. The creaking now echoed not in my ears, but somewhere in my bones. At the top of the climb, the car stopped for a second, rocked on its mounts, and I saw Chad's figure down below, far below. He stood with his head thrown back, looking at us. He didn't try to run to the control panel, he just watched. And then, another car caught up with us, with a couple of teenagers. They were laughing and shouting. Their car pushed us from behind, and our train jerked downward again. This time the roar was like something being ripped out. Ellie screamed. I hugged her and Sarah, squeezing myself into the seat. We raced along the tracks, and again a clang, a jolt, and we didn't stop. We circled around for the third time. Now I could see the faces of the people below. They were looking at us, pointing, but their faces weren't filled with horror, but curiosity, like a strange performance. The operator tried to do something with the panel, poked at the buttons, and then grabbed his head. Chad didn't move. On the third lap, something changed. The speed dropped even more. We weren't flying, but crawling upward, producing new, unfamiliar sounds with every meter. Grinding, the groan of tearing metal, the dry cracking of wood. At some point, we stopped completely. In the middle of a climb, at a 45-degree angle to the ground, a gaping web of beams and rails yawned below. The silence that followed the engine's shutdown was more terrifying than any noise. It was broken only by distant voices from below and Ellie's ragged breathing, which now resembled a sob. I tried to move, but the belt, that cracked piece of plastic, suddenly felt like a steel hoop. The latch wouldn't budge. I tugged harder, and the plastic snapped in my hands, but the belt itself didn't unbuckle. The mechanism was jammed. "Don't move," I whispered to Ellie and Sarah. "Just sit still." Finally, something happened down below. 2 parked trucks pulled up. Several men in uniform ran up, but they didn't come to us. They sat below, discussing something, looking up. I shouted, "Hey, help, get us down." My voice was lost in the distance. One of them, a responsible man in a polo shirt and cap, waved at me, as if to say, "Calm down." 10 minutes passed. 15. The sun burned my exposed skin. Thirst tightened my throat. Ellie was quietly crying. Sarah was muttering something, a prayer or a curse I couldn't make out. And then I saw Chad approaching the group below. He was saying something, pointing toward the maintenance building. The man in charge, I later learned his name, Mel, waved his hand sharply, clearly saying no. An argument ensued. Then Chad retreated, turned around, and ran? He simply left the place, got into his rusty pickup truck, and drove away. It was the most terrifying thing I saw that day. A man who knew how things worked gave up and ran. 10 minutes later, the fire brigade arrived. Slowly, relief gave way to a new wave of horror as I saw them inspecting the building, whispering among themselves. One of the firefighters approached Mel, and the same conversation began between them, gesticulating toward the building, shaking their heads. Mel pulled out his phone and started calling someone furiously. We stood there for 45 minutes. 45 minutes of blazing sun, my daughter's quiet screams, and the chilling realization no one was rushing to save us. We weren't people in trouble, we were the problem. An incident that threatened insurance claims, lawsuits, the closure of the park. The firefighters finally took action. But not like in the movies. No rapid ascents. They carefully, centimeter by centimeter, began rolling out the huge inflatable mats beneath us. Not under the entire slide, but only in the area where we could fall, as if they were preparing for our fall. Then one of them, with a ladder, began slowly climbing the service steps at the side of the track. He moved with extreme caution, as if afraid to wake a sleeping beast. Every touch he made on the structure caused a soft creaking sound. He reached our car, examined the fastenings, and shouted something down. I made out, "Dot can't unfasten. The fastening is bent, needs to be cut." Cut. Straps. With a grinder. At height. While we sat in the car, hanging by a thread. They brought up a second ladder and tools. The firefighter, a young man with a face, pale from the strain, said, "Sir, you'll need to hold on to your daughter, tight. When the belt loosens, there will be a slight pull. We'll secure you." The safety harness consisted of a rope tied to the waist and a beam somewhere on the side. It looked flimsy and unreliable. The sound of the sander, even at low speed, was a piercing screech that pierced our brains. Sparks showered us, scorching our clothes. Ellie clung to me, her eyes closed. Sarah stared straight ahead, her face like a mask. I felt the entire structure beneath us tense, as if anticipating an intrusion. The belt snapped, not softly, but with a loud, dry pop. The cart jerked, sagging a few centimeters. Someone screamed below. At that moment, a firefighter grabbed Ellie and literally pulled her out of the seat, handing her to a colleague on the next ladder. Then Sarah was pulled out the same way. I was the last one. When my feet touched the rickety metal platform of the service staircase, my knees buckled. We weren't descending, we were practically falling. Clinging to the steps, urged on by shouts from below. "Faster! Faster!" When we finally found ourselves on the ground, shivering and clad in aluminum blankets, Mel approached us. He didn't ask if we were all right. He said, "Gentlemen, I deeply apologize for the temporary inconvenience. Your tickets will of course be refunded, and we'll offer you season passes." We stared at him in silence. Sarah was the first to find the words. You left us hanging there for almost an hour." His face darkened. "We were following safety protocol. Irresponsible intervention could have led to a collapse. You don't want that, do you?" He spoke as if we were ungrateful customers making a scene over cold coffee. We sued, of course. But it turned out that Forever Fun is part of a large holding company with its own lawyers and experts. Their conclusion was a single malfunction of the control computer. The structure is completely safe. The unforeseen delay in evacuation was necessary to ensure the complete safety of the victims and rescuers. Our testimony about Chad, about the old seatbelts, about the 45-minute wait, all of it was dismissed as shock, distortion of perception. Chad disappeared. He could not be found to testify. Other employees gave confusing testimony, ultimately boiling down to the fact that everything was fine. We lost the lawsuit. The park is still operating. Devil's Canyon closed for a month for scheduled upgrades and reopened with new paint and a sign that read, "Tested, safe." But that's not the end of the story. It ends in my living room. Ellie, now 12, is afraid even of the swings at the playground. Her nights are still marred by nightmares of endless falls. Sarah flinches at every creak and hates elevators. I wake up every night with the feeling of falling, clinging to the edge of my bed. It wasn't a miracle that saved us. We were rescued an hour and a half late because we were interfering with business, and then we were accused of interfering with that business with our inconvenient demands. The scariest ride isn't the one that breaks down. It's the system that protects itself. It's the indifference in the eyes of the one who should be pressing the stop button. It's the realization that you're not a person, but a risk, an expense, and a potential problem best ignored until it's too late. And when it's too late, you're rescued, not to save yourself, but to avoid an even bigger scandal. And then they make you feel guilty for daring to be scared. We didn't break bones on that ride. We broke something inside. Trust, a sense of safety, the belief that if something goes wrong, someone will come to the rescue. And the ride goes on. Every day. It's called life after the incident, and there are no going back.